All right, it is 6:01 and we are going to officially call the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage meeting to order. If I can have a roll call done by someone from the CMA staff, that would be awesome.
Sure, and I will take that. Chair Hughes,
Present.
Vice Chair Doe,
Present.
Treasurer Daniels, Treasurer Daniels, Secretary Adams Lee, Council Member Mullins,
Present.
Council Member Crawford,
Present.
Council Member Nadi,
Present.
Council Member Dukes,
Present.
and we have excused Beef 2, and then Council Member Winston. And Council Member Dahir, and then Representative Thompson and Senator Fateh.
All right, that's
it.
everyone. All right, so if I can have a motion to adopt the meeting agenda unless there's any items that we need to add.
So moved. Crawford.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Seconded. Nadi.
Awesome. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Consent agenda item, we had, I'm getting feedback. If you all can mute just for a minute, just because I'm getting some feedback on my end. Thank you. So consent agenda item, there is the approval of the March minutes and then also the staff report, which should have been included in your packet. Were there any additions or corrections from the meeting minutes? I didn't see any. I don't know if anybody else saw any. And if not hearing any, if I can have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved. Dukes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second, Mullins.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. I see Daniels is not quite on. If we can go ahead and move to the financial report. And I see Commissioner Harrington is on. Hello.
Okay, great. Is everyone seeing the financial report?
Yes.
Okay, very little change from last month. We're still at, if you go down to this screen, an unobligated amount of $32,346. Okay, and then just in terms of what did come through, the NECA creative invoice for $18,200 did come through. And then also we had a $1,500 invoice for the Day on the Hill videographer. So those were the only two big items that came through in March. And that is about it, unless you have any questions.
No, and I just always like to remind, I don't know if we have community members on, but just, for the sake of council members, that the unobligated is always the amount that we want to look at, but keep in mind, we're still in the first year of our biennium. And so if we end up with carryover by June 30th, which is less than 2 months away, we still have until June 30th, 2023 to expend all the dollars. And because, oh, go ahead.
I was just saying I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Oh, okay. And because this is not an item that we necessarily vote on, because it's just the financial, it's informational, that is the extent of that, unless any questions for Linda and team in reference to the financials. All right, I'm seeing heads nod, or nodding meaning no. Shake, I should say. Head shake. So we're gonna move into, I see Commissioner Harrington is here, who is our Commissioner of Department of Public Safety. And after which we will also have, well, and Commissioner, let me ask you, are you and Jamil presenting together or separate?
Separate as far as I
Okay.
know, but
Okay, perfect.
that's,
And I just see that Jamil just joined as well. So we're going to go ahead and start with you, and then Jamil Lundy, who is the Committee Administrator for Public Safety and Criminal Justice Reform, will present after which. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
well, thank you. I appreciate it, Narita. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Although, as I say for the last 2 years, I liked it a lot better when we were actually in the same room.
Me too.
Frankly, because the last time I was there, y'all fed me, and I really appreciate the food was good, the company was better, and so I would appreciate if we can go back to those days as soon as whatever pandemic variant we are in passes by. But I know that there are a lot of folks that are still very much with the pandemic on mind, and we got to be safe. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to you even through via. This is Teams or Zoom. I can't remember anymore. I've lost my mind on which of the systems we're on at any given time. There's some good news and some bad news. I'll start with the good news. The good news is for those of you that were St. Paul residents at any point, you may remember Chief Thomas Smith. And Chief Smith was the chief of police after I left in 2010. And he has rejoined public safety as the assistant commissioner for law enforcement services. So that was my good news. And actually, the better news is that my original assistant commissioner for law enforcement services, Booker T. Hodges, has moved into the chief of police position. He is now chief of police of Bloomington. Which is a great position for him. It's great to see a young brother. Booker, I think, was born the year I started in police work. So when I talk about him being sort of like a son, I'm not joking, really. I was 21 and getting old quickly when I joined the police department, and Booker was just a gleam in Mama and Daddy's eye at that point. So, but he has taken over in Bloomington, and that brings us another brother that's in Cleo position. There is a brother coming to Golden Valley. He's coming here from Oklahoma, but in the interim, Alice White is the interim chief, a young sister. I think she is the first African-American woman to run a police department, even on an interim basis, other than Linda Finney, who ran the BCA. So there are some good things happening in that area. And then I get into what actually I probably have to talk about, which is the Department of Public Safety rarely deals in good news. Linda knows this from our conversations, unfortunately. And there are some real tough times that we have gone through. And I will tell you that we are preparing for tough times in the short term ahead of us. One of the things that has changed, though, and this is, I think that's important to note, is that over the last few years, it used to be that we did not have crime statistics that we could share or use to try and drive public policy, funding, and activity. We would get crime statistics once a year, usually in June, by which time it was too late to stop some of the trend lines. A few years ago, the BCI began getting crime statistics on a monthly basis, and we now are starting to get crime trend data every 10th of the month. And so we are now regularly meeting with Minneapolis, St. Paul, Hennepin, Ramsey, the 7-county metro area, Duluth, Rochester, and others to talk about what the crime trends are, and also to talk about what they are doing in regard to those crime trends and how the state can be of assistance to them. And I'll get to that at the end, because that'll be the logical lead into Jamal around what what we're doing on the legislative side. The crime trends last year were awful, and unfortunately, I can't tell you that they're much better. Both Minneapolis, who tied the record for the most homicides they've ever had, and St. Paul, which broke the record for the most homicides they had, are both on pace to do that again this year. There was a period a few years ago when Minneapolis was averaging 3 to 4 homicides a month. They're averaging 6 a month right now. We're into April barely, and I believe they're at 19. And the gun violence that we're seeing is epidemic. And so when we look at that number, we are very, very concerned about the gun violence in particular. And everyone, I'm sure, has been tracking the cases that happened nationally over the course of the weekend, whether it is the New York subway shooting today, the shooting at a nightclub down in Iowa, a shooting at a birthday party down in Houston, where literally 20, 30 gunshots. The shooting in Roseville, just in our backyard, 100 rounds fired at houses by a mentally ill person from a rifle that injured one officer, and ultimately the shooter died from the officer involved shooting the response to that. But I just want you to think about what it's like to be in what is essentially a quiet bedroom community and have 100 rounds hitting your house, taking out windows, coming through your siding, things along that lines. That's a reality, unfortunately, that I know from neighborhoods I've lived in and the neighborhoods I've worked in for all too many folks that look like us. I go to North Minneapolis for community meetings, go to South Minneapolis for community meetings, over on the east side, worked Frogtown. Gunshots and having mamas put babies in bathtubs because that was the safest place for their babies is not an uncommon world view that I have lived. So the aggravated assaults are up. In January, we had 629 that were reported. In February, or rather in January 2021, we had 629. In January of 2022, we're at 743. Keep in mind that historically, and I'm not from here, I'm from South Side of Chicago, but even on the South Side of Chicago, the weather used to help us. Yeah. It used to be when it got stupid cold and snowy and wet and froze ice on the roads, crime would drop, or at least it would flatten out. We're not seeing that the last 2 years. And with a base above normal, it tells me that spring and summer could really begin to take off rather rapidly here. Sex crimes, the good news, I guess, of the little good news I can give you is sex crimes have been dropping, so rapes are on the way down. But what we are seeing in contravention to that is predatory offenses on the internet are just skyrocketing. So solicitation for children, kiddie porn cases, the tip line that we run at the BCA is buzzing, unfortunately, and that worries me because so many of our children, because of the pandemic, have been pushed into a almost exclusively online world, and so the access that predators have to our kids is higher now than it would have been a few years ago. And parents had to go back to work as we start to return to the office, and that leaves our kids vulnerable, and that concerns me. Once again, it's a good news, bad news story. Robberies and carjackings had been starting to drop, and that's normal this time of the year. Typically, robberies would drop as the cold weathers get by because you wouldn't have as many clothes to hide the gun in, and the carjackings are starting to drop a little bit. Primarily, we're seeing the drop in Hennepin County. Now, the numbers are historically high for Hennepin County, but they're beginning to move in a positive direction. So, good news, bad news there. Burglary has been down, which for all of us, you think about it, how many of us have been at home all day, every day, or been, in our office at the house or whatever else? And so the opportunities for residential burglaries has dropped dramatically, and it's continuing to stay down. But what is going up is gasoline thefts and catalytic converter auto crimes are going up. And one of the big concerns, and I'm having this conversation with our fire chiefs, is that one of the new tactics, because so many of the new cars have anti-siphon systems on the fuel nozzle where you pump the gas in. And so the new tactic that we're starting to see just beginning, it's an early trend, is they're drilling a hole in the gas tank from the bottom and then capturing underneath. We've had, I would call them dumb people. There's another term I would use, but this is a public audience. Using an electric drill underneath the car, drilling into the gas tank. When the spark from the electric drill hits the gasoline, bad things happen. And we're trying to get the fire departments ready, because when that guy runs with his pants and shirt on fire, covered in gasoline, he is likely to set fire to other things as the gas continues to pour out from underneath the car. And so that is a new crime trend that we're starting to look for, and that we're trying to get our public safety folks, the fire folks, to start thinking about. Another, I'd say it's an unintended consequence of the pandemic, is that overdose deaths have also skyrocketed, and we are seeing that continue. So in an average year, a few years ago, we would have seen 500 overdose deaths in the state of Minnesota. A couple of years ago, as we got a fresh batch of fentanyl-laced dope that came into the state, that went up to 1,000. We are now projecting 1,500 overdose deaths in the state of Minnesota. And the fentanyl that we are now seizing is enough fentanyl to kill literally, it's a bulk quantities that's enough to kill literally every man and woman in the state of Minnesota if it was to be put in the market. We are seizing it in large quantities, coming both from the south and from the north, that are coming across border points that are all too often not checked. Part of this, once again, is from a public safety perspective, is how do we equip EMS with naloxone and those kind of remedies so that when we get those calls, we can save the lives of these young people who are all too often using these drugs in quantities that are lethal. And they are, like most drug addicts, they are trying to get to that next level of high, which means they keep upping the dose. And when you mix fentanyl, which is essentially a sedative on top of the dope, it doesn't feel like the dope hit your system. And then you double down on that, and that's where we start seeing the overdoses. One of the things that is different in my life these last couple of years is the closer relationship that the state of Minnesota has with the city of Minneapolis, and to a lesser extent, the city of St. Paul. I will tell you that St. Paul still largely has its act together, and I get very few calls from Chief Axtell, except when there is like the federal trial or there is an event at the Capitol that we know is going to draw thousands of people. City of Minneapolis, because of the dramatic departure of so many of their officers, is regularly in conversation with us about what can the state do to assist them. And I will tell you that, we moved 5 detectives from the narcotics squad, frankly, from the statewide narcotics squad, into working violent crime cases in Minneapolis a year and a half ago. They were supposed to be there for the summer. We were hoping to be able to help them start the process with Anaya and the babies that were shot and killed in North Minneapolis. 100 search warrants later, we were able to charge the killer of Anaya. We are still working on the other baby cases, and we haven't left. And we are now proposing to add an additional 10 more detectives to our caseload to work violent crimes in the Minneapolis area to try and get a handle on the gun violence, the carjackings, the murders that we are seeing on that side of the river. We have also moved State Patrol's aviation unit to work frequently over in Minneapolis. If those of you that live in South Minneapolis can complain to me when we get on to question and answer about the noise, I appreciate that it's noisy, but what we have been trying to do is, how do you chase someone off of a carjacking that doesn't put you in a position where when they drive onto Lake Street during rush hour, we're not putting innocent lives at risk? And so the helicopter is our vehicle for being able to follow them home and direct the officers to make the arrest there, rather than putting individuals on the road at risk. So that has continued to be our initiative there. As I said, there's not a lot of good news there. Aggravated assaults had dropped that one week to another, but they are still higher than they have been in the previous years. One of the areas that I'm particularly concerned about is domestic violence, domestic aggravated assaults, and domestic homicides. We are seeing women. One city has mentioned to me that 1/3 of their homicide victims are women. That is out of a more large sample than you'd like. And normally women account for 10% or less of homicide victims. So the fact that they're now 33%, and that some of the ways they're being killed by their ex-husbands and partners, beaten to death, set on fire. The number of women that we are seeing assaulted due to domestic violence is growing. And we have seen it grow during the pandemic, and we are continuing to be really very concerned that this is not going away. Even though the pandemic is starting to abate, some women are going back into the workplace where we hope, their doctors and their co-workers will see the signs and therefore be able to help them escape. It is very troubling to see the level of violence directed that way. As I said, carjackings, we're starting to see in some cities. I'd say, for example, in Ramsey County in January, we had 5. In February, we had 7, down substantially from 18 where we were the preceding year. So we're starting to see some good things there. Some of that's directed by law enforcement, whether it's St. Paul and Ramsey County really making a concerted effort to go after the repeat carjackers. That does seem to be a crime where we are seeing the same individuals involved in several of the offenses. And so it really does look like an area that's ripe for investigation. Dakota County had 0 in February and only 2 in January. As I said, Hennepin County and Minneapolis is where our biggest concerns are, where they had 51 and 46, down from where they had been, but still way higher than we would want to see at any time. I mentioned cyber tips. We had 110 cyber tips compared to 231 cyber tips. That was the month before, but that's the early part of the month. And so we're very concerned about what we're seeing in terms of that. The last couple items before I'll just get to questions. One of the things that we publicized was a program that the State Patrol is operating called Highway Enforcement for Aggressive Traffic. We call it HEAT. We started it out over in Minneapolis, but we have been all over the state with it. Our focus is speed. In 2021, we had 507 fatal crashes, which was up substantially from years past. We had been trending down in fatal crashes, but the speeds are just insane. I'm talking 120 miles an hour in a 50, 110 miles an hour in a 50, and it's not the speed, it's the sudden stop that oftentimes, but we're seeing people get run over, we're seeing innocent bystanders get hit, and we're seeing crashes that the only way to stop them, that, as far as we can tell, is to try and do this very concerted, very directed, and very public effort to get people to slow down. We are advertising to everybody that we're coming to your neighborhood. We hope that will have an effect. It doesn't necessarily, because when I look at the numbers that we've had, 308 stops. This was as of the end of March. 240 of them were speed contacts. And that is really pretty much no matter where I go. Rochester, 52 contacts, 43 of them were speed. Mankato, 48 contacts, 39 of them were speed. St. Cloud was even with 8 and 8. Brainerd was 30 and 29. So whether we do it in the metro area, we do it in greater Minnesota, we're seeing the same behavior pattern. And we recognize that if we don't get a handle on this, we are going to continue to have problems. So in closing, the governor's office has proposed what in my mind is the largest public safety budget that I've ever seen. It is investments in local governments to help fund public safety needs. And one of the things that's unique about this is that this is not the state prescribing how you, the community, should spend the money. This is the government saying, you know your community's best. Do you need mental health counselors to work on mental health crisis calls? Do you need violence interrupters to stop gang violence? Do you need drug rehab houses because you have an alcohol or a drug problem in your community? So the idea is that we would invest in local governments and in local communities to prevent, intervene in crime problematic behaviors. It is an investment in community groups. And I will tell you that my first calls of the spring were to Ronnie Patterson, who runs New Hope Baptist over in St. Paul, and Bishop Howell and the Reverend from Salem over in Minneapolis, to say 21 Days of Hope worked. For those of you who don't know, this was church folks going out and occupying some of the toughest corners in the Twin Cities. And to give you an example, in Frogtown and in North Minneapolis, Broadway and Lindale, a 45% reduction in violent crime when the churches were there. My question is, can I get you to come back? Because I need you to come back, but I also need to recognize, and this is my recognition, having worked with clergy for a long time, that I can't expect you to be there all summer, all fall, all winter, because you all got regular jobs and you have other duties, and the church has other things it has to do. And so how can the state support the church and these efforts, which are having the effect? And in fact, especially in Minneapolis, where they're short of cops, and we're not going to have enough cops. If they hired at maximum volume right now for the rest of the year, they'd still be 200 cops short of where they were, which was short of where they needed to be to do community policing. So we have to ask community to step up, and we have to be able to provide resources for community to do that. The last piece of this, and I talked about prevention and intervention, but we do believe that enforcement is an important component of this, but it's targeted enforcement. This is not a blanket enforcement. This is, as I said, looking at the repeat carjackers and going to get them. This is looking at the gun dealers who are selling the guns and going to get them. This is looking at the young men and the young women who are putting guns on people and pulling triggers and going and getting them. Because frankly, I'm not sure that the church or an intervention is going to be successful in stopping the crimes of violence that they're involved in. And so that is the initiative from a state perspective that we are pushing. There's a lot of other things that we're doing. We're asking for body cams for every cop in the state, because I believe that that will help us hold young officers and old officers accountable when bad things happen. It'll provide transparency to the public about what happened when a tragedy does happen. We are continuing to work. We need to continue to work on victim-sensitive services, though. I have one victim advocate for every officer involved shooting victim's family in the state of Minnesota. How long do you think I'm going to be able to keep her going when those happen? And they're not just happening in the metro area. 60% of them are happening in greater Minnesota. So I needed to be in greater Minnesota tending to families who have just lost a loved one. I also needed to be helping people in the Twin Cities, and she needs to be in North and South and in the downtowns all at the same time. And we have to do more to work on victim-sensitive approaches to crime, including domestic violence, including violence against women, including Ruth Richardson's approach to setting up an office for missing and murdered African-American women, which is a proposal that we have started working on the Native American side with missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And now we are hopeful to see that funded and set up with African-American women also, because we know that when a sister goes missing, it is oftentimes not just hours, but days before that report is actually taken. And we know that when time is lost in that front end of an investigation, we lose evidence and we lose any real chance of being able to help find that sister alive. I'll close with that. Happy to answer questions. And I saw some things pop up in chat, so I can look in the chat or people can ask me directly. Trying to not take too much of Jamal's time. So I think I'm probably right about where my time was supposed to end. So.
No, you're good. So Councilmember Dukes had posted in the chat, he said, what is the intelligence on how guns are entering the community? And what are some policy recommendations to stop the flow of illegal weapons and ammunition into communities of color? And then is there anything beyond background checks and banning assault weapons that targets the flow of these weapons? So, and that's a long question, so it is in the chat just for your reference.
I see it in the chat, and I'll try and be relatively concise. The intelligence is we have guns that are coming out of a couple places. One, they're coming out of cars, frankly. That's one of the things that I've heard is because people are worried about the carjacking, people started arming themselves. And one of the places they armed themselves was in their car. But then when their car gets stolen because they left it running and they forgot that the gun was under the seat, or it was and they thought was a lockbox, but it wasn't all that securely locked. We're seeing some of those guns pop up. We're also seeing straw buyers, and our federal partners in ATF have been really stepping up their game. They have moved extra bodies, and they are really focusing on the straw buyer. Straw buyer is essentially a non-felon who buys a number of guns and then sells them to people who know that they are not allowed to have them. And so we also see that as another area that we can do some work on. I'm actually guardedly optimistic that we have not had an ATF director in the United States in the last couple of administrations, and they've nominated somebody again. It's been since B. Todd Jones, who was our Minnesota U.S. attorney. That was the last time that we've had a alcohol, tobacco, and firearms director moving things along. So I'm guardedly optimistic that maybe we can actually get some action there. We are happy to see Andy Luger come in as the new U.S. attorney, because his first day, literally after being confirmed, he was at a crime meeting with BCA, Minneapolis, our federal partners, St. Paul, talking about what are we going to do around violent crime and some of these violent crime crews that are operating. So I'm hopeful that we're going to see some federal investigations there. I think background checks are an important component of this. Banning assault weapons or SAMSAWs is important, but the ghost gun piece is absolutely also a part of this. The loophole for the gun sales at like your swap meets and things along that lines is also a loophole that you can drive a truck through, frankly. And we've had proposals to do that. I think red flag laws, which is stopping individuals who are either suicidal or who are involved in domestic violence from keeping guns until they have been adjudicated by a court. So it's not the cops making the decision. It is a court making the decision that somebody is too dangerous. I think that is another component of what might work in terms of how do we get a handle on the gun violence that we have. And there are issues, and I will fully admit that we are having conversations with our prosecutors around individuals that we see that are caught with guns, that are ineligible to have guns, who are released back into the community on parole or on bail, that we think when we have sufficient number of cases that they have been involved in bad action, we think it's not unreasonable for the courts to make a decision that their presence in the community is inimical to public safety. But that's a policy decision that I recognize is in the hands of the prosecutors and in the hands of the courts. But it is certainly a conversation that I'm hearing from community and that I'm hearing in public safety. So.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. And then I see Councilmember Adams-Lee. Go ahead. Your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Harrington. I have a question in regards to, shucks, sorry.
I can hear you. I just can't see you. So I can hear you if that's helpful. So.
Oh, okay. My question is relative to children and schools and what, I'm, a therapist at a St. Paul school, K through 8, and it is astoundingly disturbing that we are starting to see, middle schoolers have been caught with weapons, but of most recent, right before, these are the things that are not televised. So, before spring break, one of my first graders, don't know where he got it from, but he brought it for show and tell. And this is a really dysregulated little guy, and I can tell you that we were all not prepared for what we saw. And when they called me in to talk the child into giving them the weapon, I will tell you that, I saw 2 or 3 of my lives go in front of my face, because that could be my grandchild, that could be my son, and emotionally, I just lost it. It's like, baby, where did you get this? Who would have given? And so what I found, what we know, what we're hearing every day. And my question is, how do we in the schools? I know you guys are so overworked and so overpaid, and I want to say publicly, Sir,
Not
thank
about
you.
overpaid, but I'll say
Thank you.
overworked. I'll agree with you on that part. So,
Oh, okay. Well, if you got it like that, you come on over to the school and put in a few hours.
we've actually
But
had that
no.
conversation, Ms. Lee. I would tell you, and I've been, I was down in Egan with Roger New. I was out in St. Cloud with Blair Anderson, and both of those school districts still have SROs, and they talk about the fact that the SROs are viewed as an asset in those schools because they have a relationship with the students. And now, primarily, that's high school. We generally don't have SROs in where there's a first grader involved, but I do think that that is one of the things that we have to start thinking about is how do we help the staff that are working most directly with our youth? And so one of the things that that DPS has done is that we have a brand new director of JJAC, which is the Juvenile Justice Advisory Council. They're supposed to be helping us make good policy decisions. We are working to add additional staff to recognize trauma and how do we respond to trauma with young people so that we can help provide facilities and programs and funding so that some of those things, some of those young people do get the help they need, and that we can have more of an early warning system when that child's living, I'll use my old frame of reference when I was in juvenile. There were kids that came from crazy houses. Yeah, and we all knew them because we'd been in those houses for whether it was domestic or somebody got molested or whatever else. And you knew looking at the little guys that were in that house that they almost certainly did not have a level playing field to get out that door in good shape because their parents were not going to provide any kind of stable platform for them to understand what the good life was supposed to be. And we were dependent on preachers and coaches and music teachers. We would try and refer them to those kind of adults in the community who could help provide at least a moment of stability. I remember some of those kids who basically, they lived at the gym. They didn't live at the gym because they were necessarily good basketball players. They lived at the gym because the gym was safe. How do we provide that and how do we facilitate that, I think, is part of what we need to be having a conversation about. And I pose this to the clergy. It's like, it's a matter of where do you want to invest your time? I think we need to invest it in kids. This is going to sound crass, but I've never really reformed a 40-year-old burglar. But there's some kids out there who we got into, whether it was scouts or music, or we got them a job. And those kids, I still see them. They're now parents of their own kids, and they are living a regular life. So I just think that's where we need to be investing our time and investing our effort. And that means partnerships with our schools, partnerships with our parks and rec, which I see as a direct crime prevention provider. We need to be a partner with our libraries. And these silos that we have in our cities don't facilitate that. And so that would be one of the things that I'd say. I think we need to bring all of the players who meet with these children, and rather than saying you've got them from 7 to 3, we should look at them as an entire child and say, child don't come in shifts. How do we have a wraparound service that helps that child 24/7? Because if we don't, we're going to pay now or pay later. That's an unfortunate reality that I've worked with. So
Commissioner, what I wanted to finish saying was that my concern is that what we found out was that this child's older sibling and or older relative is using these young children to drop things off in certain places, and that was disturbing. So that was the other part that I'm concerned. How do we handle that when we, because this is what you've already spoken about is pervasive, but it's pervasive to where they're involving the children.
And when we've done that in the past, we have ended up going after them for, and you can start with a contributing delinquency charge, but oftentimes it's not. It is in fact a felony aiding and abetting charge. We had guys that I can remember when I was working in Frogtown who were, the couriers for the dope were the little guys, because they knew that the little guys weren't going to do any time. And the little guys, even if they told on them, weren't, considered credible witnesses. And so we had to work harder to try and track that back to the dealer who was actually selling the dope over on Jackson Elementary steps, to be able to make that case against them so that we could hold them accountable and therefore stop the chain between them and the child. When it's a relative, it's even harder to do. So I'd be interested in having a longer conversation about, well, how can we look at that and see what happens, especially in an interfamily dynamic. How can we work together to try and come up with how do we build a case around that?
So let me there's two other quick questions. I knew this was going to be a hot topic, so I don't want to cut the conversation. And Jamil, we're serving your time. We haven't forgotten about you. But two quick questions that came. So one came from Council Member Crawford. He says, trust in police is at an all-time low, yet we need good policing in our communities. As a council, how can we bridge the divide to building a healthy relationship with law enforcement and community? And then the other part of the question is there funding towards this effort?
No funding that I'm aware of, although we have asked for some of the larger philanthropic communities to step in and assist us in having some, what I think they're critical or beloved community conversations. Interfaith Action has been helping us with doing some of that. And I would say, I'll challenge the question. I will say that in the city of Minneapolis, trust in police is an all-time low. I would not disagree with you on that at all. In a lot of the other communities that I go to, I don't see that nearly as vividly displayed. And I think that tells me that even if it's broader than that, and I think there are certainly elements that it is broader than that in some of our communities. What we know is that Minneapolis, because it is so visible, is driving the narrative for so many others. And I think you as the council need to be involved in the conversation about, is there going to be a Department of Public Safety that is going to oversee the city of Minneapolis? You need to be involved as one of the groups that is at the table that makes the decision about who and what are the qualifications for the next chief in Minneapolis, and what are you looking for there? Are you looking for someone who's going to maintain the status quo? Or are you looking for somebody who's going to come in and turn this thing upside down? Are you looking for someone who has got the experience of the guardian mentality out? For example, one of my colleagues out in Seattle, Kathleen O'Toole, she and I were talking about a consent decree that she oversaw, where she brought in, a complete sweeping change on how all the cops were trained, how they were recruited, and how they were hired, and how they were recognized. I think that's a place that the council has a very definite role, because I think if to the extent that we can help Minneapolis get their act together, and I can tell you that I meet with them on a regular basis, their chiefs and their elected officials. The quicker we can do that, the better off policing will be, because unfortunately, I have a lot of young folks who are saying to themselves, I don't want to go into that business because I look at it and go, I don't want to be sued. I don't want to be doxxed. I don't want to be outed. I don't want to do bad things. Even when I think I'm doing the right thing, you can be accused of doing the wrong thing. And so there's a lot of folks right now that we're trying to have this conversation on a statewide basis of getting people into public safety. And part of what I'm telling them is, not all the jobs in public safety involve carrying a gun. I need good report takers. I need good violence interrupters. I need good victim advocates. I need good mental health professionals. I need good firefighters and good EMS folks that can do the job right. Because if we can bring all of them together with those few that do have to carry a gun, because there are times when that is necessary to send somebody into a dangerous place, to arrest somebody who doesn't want to be taken. You're going to need people who are willing to do that. But that's not the majority of the context that people have with their police department. And I think we need to think more broadly and more robustly about what is it that we want in public safety. And I don't know that anybody has had really that conversation yet. And that's a conversation I think would be worthwhile having, because if you don't know where you're going, then you're going to be lost. And I think we're lost now in a lot of ways, because I don't think we've really articulated where it is, what the mission and what the goal is of public safety. And I'd like to see this council and others involved in that conversation, and then we can start the process of recruiting the right young people into the business and into this profession. So.
No, that's good. Thank you for that. There's another kind of question comment. So curiosity on how a community strikes a balance between policies that disrupt minority disproportionate contact versus unregulated and unchecked. We tend to swing the pendulum too far in both directions with erosive consequences for Black people.
No, and you are absolutely right. I think part of this is relationship based, though. I come from a background that says cops know the people that they serve. They're not serving anonymous people. They're serving their community. And whether that is because we lived in the community, we grew up in the community, we shopped in those communities, you don't treat people you know the way you treat strangers sometimes. I think that's just common sense. And to the extent that we have cops who drive by with their windows up and they don't see the people they police or who they are supposed to serve as real people with full lives, you're going to get them treated poorly because they do not understand the dynamics and the background of who those people are and what they've seen and what has brought them to this moment, which is, frankly, for almost everybody that I've ever come in contact with as a cop, I only meet you on your worst possible day. I can't base my experience of you based on that episode. What has helped me was I met you before when I was at the park with your family because we were doing a community policing. But it helped me that I had seen you in your place of business when I stopped in to just say, hey, how you doing? How's things going? Those kind of relationships color every contact from that point on. And it oftentimes is not. It is those voices from the community that know the cops and the cops that know the community that really, I don't think they're being heard today. And I think that's where we have to go back to.
No, thank you. And then I promise this is the last question, but I want to ask this question because we often don't talk much about the African immigrant community. So Vice Chair Doe poses a question. What kind of experience are you having with crime in the African immigrant community? And what types of intervention measures do you think leaders should be involved with given cultural and other variances?
I have a very vivid recollection because yesterday when we were swearing Booker Hodges in as the chief in Bloomington, one of the young brothers that I'd hired, who was a Somali named Salah, is now on the fast track to being a captain at the Metro Transit Police Department. And there was a day not too long ago where Salah and 5 other Somalis, including Kadra, the first female Somali officer, were the roll call for the afternoon shift for Metro Transit. They bring a recognition of community that I would not have had if I had not worked with them. So I'll give you an example. The first day of Ramadan, I sent a note out to all the police departments in the state to remind them that Ramadan was coming, that people were going to be coming to the mosques at night, that they'll be fasting during the day. And oh, by the way, if you have Somali or Muslim observant cops, they will be fasting and not drinking during the day. And so you may want to think about how you adjust their shifts. That is an enlightened position that I got because I worked with Wahid Siraj and Salah and Kadra. And we need to continue to build that so that the new Liberian immigrants and the other immigrants that we're seeing, because we're going to see folks now from the Ukraine. We're already starting to see the Afghanis coming in. And we have not really, I know this is a different council, but we really have not addressed the issues on Asian hate. And unfortunately, African-American hate crimes are the most frequent hate crimes in the state in the last few years. That even while Asian hate got a lot of publicity, hate against African and African immigrants were the most frequent hate crimes that we saw reported to the BCA. So there is work to be done there. And I think once again, that comes back to working directly in community. And the last couple of years have been hard for that. I mean, we would go to their community celebrations and their New Year celebrations, and it was a way to build bridges between us. But for the last couple of years, there has been none of that. I'm trying to think about will there be iftars this year where we can sit together and celebrate? I think that those breaking bread with each other is an important component of that. But knowledge of those communities and these new communities as they come into place. I will end with one hopeful observation from my DVS technology guys. We're working with Google on a translator app that will not just translate it into Somali and Hmong and Spanish, but will have the capacity to translate our documents so that driver's license documents and victims documents can be read in literally dozens and dozens of languages. And I think that's a step in the right direction. But it's just, when you think about it, it's a pretty small step. If you're a victim of a crime or you a new resident who's trying to figure out how you get your driver's license so you can go drive to work, just being told you can at least read the documents in your own language, to me seems like it's a step in the right direction, but it's not enough.
Thank you, Commissioner Harrington. And I know that several people had questions. But as always, we can always invite you back. You always give us
always happy to come back
great
anytime.
Wealth of, great wealth of information. And hopefully when we ask you back, we'll be face to face so we can feast together.
There you go. I'm looking forward to that.
So thank you so much. You're welcome to stay to the rest of the meeting, or I understand
Reverend Webb, I would go visit his church. So I'm on my way to Reverend Webb's church, actually. So I got to run. Thank you very much,
Thank you so much. Take care.
Now.
Jamil, you are on, my friend. So we have Jamil Lundy, the committee administrator with the Public Safety and Criminal Justice Reform.
How's it going for us, folks? I'm going to try to be quick and to the point. I have 4 points to cover and kind of providing you all a little legislative update and overview. Those 4 points will be the post board, crime, probation reform, and then just general oversight recommendations that I'm going to give to you all. So hope you all are all ears for that. So first, I just want to start off with a general overview, which is the theme, which is evidence-based practice. I can go chapter and verse over what that means and what that's supposed to mean, but hopefully folks are pretty well aware of kind of the general lack of evidence-based practice in the criminal justice space. Much of what we do in criminal justice, from probation to prisons to prosecutors, is not based on any evidence. And so a great example is that of fentanyl. You've heard the commission and others talk about how deadly fentanyl is, which it very much is. There's currently a bill to try to raise that until the level of heroin. They say, hey, heroin's the highest sentencing that we give for drugs. Fentanyl is the deadliest drug. It should be at that rate. And then it sounds very persuasive. It's legal consistency until you ask the question, based on what evidence? Is there anywhere, in any jurisdiction in the country where you've raised fentanyl sentencing rates and that actually led to a decrease in fentanyl deaths? And there is no jurisdiction in the country that did that. And so therefore, that's the question that you should always beg when anyone presents you a criminal justice reform or criminal justice solution to a public safety problem. So I will try to just keep that as your North Star when we're going through all these possible things. So number one is the post board. This could be the most important thing before you all, as I think this council has the most possible ability to influence the post board, not only through the appointment that you all make to the Citizens Council, but there's being a voice of conscience and morality. Post board's a regulatory agency that licenses around, I think, 11,000 uniformed law enforcement officers, including officers that work in Department of Public Safety, oversees all law enforcement in the state. This licensing body has not taken a singular action, not one, independently, has not changed a singular regulation independently since the death of George Floyd. It's been 2 years. Hasn't done a single thing, has not found a single problem with the current code of conduct. Now, you all talked about SROs currently, and our good commissioner, said, hey, maybe we can come together and talk about it and we can figure it out. And these people are doing great things. How about we regulate SROs? Because we currently don't. Currently, right now, your SRO can, in an unprovoked way, punch a kid in the face, and it would not violate their code of conduct. Unless they were charged and convicted with 5th-degree assault. which almost no officer has done. Matter of fact, you can look at a Supreme Court case where an officer insulted two Somali youths and was let off, and in fact continues to practice in Richfield currently. And so there is much to do with regulating law enforcement. They essentially are beyond regulation unless they're criminally convicted. That is absurd. No other licensing board has farmed away their ability to regulate their own licensees to prosecutors. And that's what law enforcement has done. And you will never hear that from any law enforcement, including, unfortunately, our own commissioner, that this is a absolute dereliction of duty. The legislature has acted on police licensing. Divided legislature, my committee, Senator Limmer, has acted on police licensing more than the Post Board has. And so they are teeing up a vote slowly but surely to overhaul their rules. And I would just call as much attention to that as possible, because it is absurd that any licensing body, if their profession underwent the type of scrutiny that law enforcement went over, that it would take them over a year into 2 years to change a singular regulation independently. And so I think a bright light needs to be shined there. So outside of that, again, SROs are really important. Undercover officers, evidence collection, everything about being a police is subject to regulation by this board, and it does nothing. And so I would hope that angers you as much as it angers me, seeing as we are the state where George Floyd occurs. Secondly, we're going to go to crime, and we're currently back to crime levels of about a year, 2-3 years ago, maybe max. Hearing it's the rate of increase is stunning. It would almost be like we're letting people out the house right now, right? Like it would be like a sudden mass of people have entered public space. We are living in crime that we've had previously, the crime rates we've had previously. Now, obviously, the total amounts will be higher because population has increased. That does not mean there's no need to take aggressive action, but that does mean that we should couch that aggressive action within the context of, have we seen it before? Have we not seen it before? And per capita rates, we've seen this before. Like, we're not into Mad Max yet. I know the news and a lot of the coverage would have you believe that, but we aren't. With that said, I like to think about it in a very simple way, so please forgive me, that there are two types of ways to invest in public safety: smart money and dumb money, right? Dumb money asks nothing of our public safety officers, asks no standards, no accountability, gives no direction. It just dumps money and says, spend it well. And if you give dumb money to institutions, what can you expect them to do? The same old dumb things they do already, right? And that's what we've seen from a lot of different public safety proposals. I will not name any in particular, but particularly the Senate, right? Where their biggest contribution to our carceral system is additional prison beds. 2,300 additional prison beds, so many prison beds we will need to build an extra prison, right? They invest more money, or just about the same amount. I think after the amendments, it's going to be around $30 million into additional prison beds. And that's without the actual $10 to $50 million of an extra prison. So they pretty much put more money into imprisoning people than to educating people this year in the upcoming Senate bill, when we have a $9 billion surplus, by the way. That's where their investment lies. And this is not a political piece. This is, I want to factually tell you, and this sounds like, I'm saying, so let's go to law enforcement. What does the Senate invest in? The Senate invests in, there is, I believe, only one permanent investment into law enforcement. It's only about $3 million, and that's into state law enforcement. That's VSETs. They currently, if you want to have some fun, go and look up VSETs. They have a report, and look at their racial breakdown of that report. You'll find about 21% of the people they arrest are Black people, right? And you'll find similar disparities across the VSET. So that's what they're investing in. Their other investments are simply giving police money. We're not talking about tying that money to better practices. We're not talking about, no, this is literally bonus money shoveled away to law enforcement. That's their biggest law enforcement investment, $47 million, in just giving money to law enforcement, right? And so that contrasts with the House bill, the bill we put together. Again, hey, maybe I'm a little biased. I like to call it smart money, right? Which is, we do fund state law enforcement, we fund the BCA, but we fund analysts in the BCA, and the evidence collectors in the BCA, so they can help assist rural law enforcement in actually solving a lot of these crimes. Another fact that you likely won't see in your media, or unfortunately your discussions with our commissioner, is that crime is up around the state. If you look at the top 20 jurisdictions where crime is up, you'll see they are not clustered around the metro. They are spread throughout the entire state. That's because the entire state's seeing a rise in violent crime. The entire state is seeing uniformly, right? And that is because the dirty secret is they're mostly clustered around areas that have been historically underinvested. And that is both the Black community, the Black immigrant community, but also the white community in those rural small towns as well. And everyone politically benefits from ignoring them. But we had a whole week of hearings last year strictly on greater Minnesota crime issues. And what they'll tell you is there's a systemic lack of investment in things you've heard before. You're talking about drug treatment programs, juvenile delinquency programs. I know we have a board member who's up in Duluth, and when you get out there, they'll tell you the same. There's a bunch of lack of access to social services and probation resources that just tie people up in knots. And so our bill does a great job in targeting resources, again, smart money towards best practices, things that actually work. And that requirement that they actually, do new things that we've seen that are based on evidence that lower crime rate, both in the long term, but also there are immediate interventions. That is what I would hope that this council would demand of us. And then I guess you'll see, the commissioner is correct. There's historic investments into crime prevention within our bill, but also historic investments in the local law enforcement. These investments are smart stuff, right? No undercover operations. You can't buy military equipment and chemical munitions, and you can give bonuses, but you got to apply for those bonuses, and those bonuses can only be given to individuals that have demonstrated at least a year without a bad discipline record, right? So I just think these two big bills are super important to look at. One is kind of the future. One is kind of funding stuff of the past. One's funding a bunch of prisons and cop bonuses. The other's funding a lot of community resources and, smart law enforcement practices like community policing, additional investigators, additional, co-responders, body cameras, those type of things. So those are the two major bills, and I'm partly trying to move quickly. The third most important item is probation reform. So what we currently are funding a probation system where if you decrease your probation population, you will lose money. We find that to be a perverse incentive, that it incentivizes people to keep people on probation as long as possible. Currently, there's no barriers to charging fees. So you can charge as much and as little, a bunch of ticky-tack fees to people who currently are already in probation. And while we may not have a lot of sympathy for some of those individuals on probation, even though I tend to, that actually makes it harder for them to make it out of probation if they keep have a bunch of economic barriers. Last but not least, even if they fail someone and they get revoked, they get yanked back into prison, these counties continue to get money for that case. And so our current way we fund probation essentially incentivizes counties to keep people on probation as long as possible, to get fees out of them, to revoke them at will because there's no consequences for the county. You just send them back to prison. In fact, it just lightens their caseload. And so what we're looking to do is to change those important policy measures. There's a whole backstory to a whole task force put together. A whole bunch of folks are interested in working on it, but the big piece of the pie that at least the big important perspective is while we look to fund counties additionally, and we're looking to fund counties at like $20 million more a year, $30 million is a huge amount of money we're going to be putting into counties. The House position is we should be looking at some of these perverse incentives, and we refuse to fund these counties without dismantling some of these perverse incentives. So we're looking at, if we're going to put $30 million into probation, we should be ending fees that are charged individual probationers. We should be looking at, hey, if you revoke someone, then you don't continue to get, you're part of the formula because you're not even supervising them. They're in a prison, right? Looking at different ways to continue. And if you early discharge someone, then we will continue funding them. If you've been successful, then there's a financial incentive to get people off probation early. Those are going to be kind of I can get in the weeds if folks want to follow up, but the big picture is I think this council has an important role to play when it comes to overlooking probation. So last but not least are just oversight recommendations. I hate having these speeches or talking to folks and not leaving them with something to actually look to do or advocate for. And so this is Jamel Lundy's small box of things to do, right? Administration, we should be pushing all law enforcement, including our state law enforcement, to collect data on race. So that conversation with the DPS, they're currently doing a HEAP program where they're arresting people from North Minneapolis to Brooklyn Center. They are just ultra looking for speeders there, looking at all the speeders, right? God bless them. But you know what they're not doing? They're not looking at the racial component of who they're pulling over. And if you looked at the racial component between North Minneapolis and Brooklyn Center, then you'll likely probably see a whole bunch of Black people. I would note that 15% of those stops that they're making in that corridor are for lack of seatbelts. 1 out of 6. And so I would just strongly advise people to look, when you talk to the administration, press them on collecting race data on law enforcement. Secondly, for the administration, is the governor appointed this post board. The post board should be acting. It should be acting by the 2nd anniversary of George Floyd. Folks should be, if possible, saying that as loudly and as forthrightly. To me, I'm a big outcomes person, evidence-based person. Like what we saw this administration do in response to the emergency that was COVID, right? They twisted themselves inside out in a matter of months. We had an emergency, not of racial strife, but of unconstitutional policing. They straight up violated the Constitution over and over again, took George Floyd's life, Dante Wright, been going over and over again. It's not about, which is important in this space, yes, it isn't a racial issue, but it's deeper than that. There are constitutional actors who have a duty to protect the Constitution. They are failing at doing that. And we should treat it as an emergency as it is. To me, that's the best thing you can do to build police-community relations, is knowing that someone other than your chief can hold you accountable. That I can call the licensing board and I can get you, if that is when we are then at an equal footing, when I can get you in trouble as a law enforcement if you don't follow the rules. Currently, if the chief turns the other way, there's nothing any citizen can do. And so there is a good reason for citizens to feel as though, hey, I'm not confident in law enforcement. By the way, this exists in with the water protectors up in I'm sorry, I don't know, Brother Crawford's not in my head with a lot of these reservations. They are minorities in their communities in greater Minnesota. If you ask them if they're confident in law enforcement, they'll say, first of all, hey, my law enforcement, I have confidence in our law enforcement, the tribal law enforcement, but in these county law enforcement officers, I'm scared to death of them, right? And so I think there's a lot of lack of confidence in law enforcement, especially in greater Minnesota, especially outside of our cities, but you gotta ask the right people. For the Senate caucus, I will ask how they're going to pay for a new prison and why they refuse to fund victims organizations, co-responder models, fund anything that helps public safety but law enforcement. For our House caucus, for us, right? How should you hold us accountable? The governor's got $1 billion, right? The governor's got $1 billion of long-term COVID money. All the issues that we have on the table, why are we going to negotiate away this $1 billion, right? Why? We're always told as people of color, hey, we got to come to an agreement with the Senate. That's why the House of Representatives can't do more for people of color. Well, if the governor has $1 billion of long-term COVID money that's actively trying to go for employment insurance, I'm not sure, whatever the deal is, hey, people of color, why don't we just not spend that money, refuse to make a deal on that money, and then use it for people of color? That way we don't have to get an agreement with the Senate. That should be a hard question you're asking House members. And for the courts, you should be asking, last but not least, what about their appointments to these policymaking bodies? There's a whole bunch of questions being raised about, hey, what about public defenders getting their money, right? Hey, the public defenders may strike. What's going on with public defenders? And the question no one ever asked is, hey, why are there no public defenders on the board of public defenders? Hey, whose interest does the board of public defenders serve? The reason why is because the judiciary appoints most of the Board of Public Defenders. The judiciary controls one side of the bar. And the same would be the same for the Sentencing Guidelines Commission. Hey, why did the Sentencing Guidelines Commission get rid of the custody status point, which would have saved us 600 prisoners over the course of the next 10 years? Why did it do that even though evidence showed that this custody status point, evidence-based practice, wasn't an evidence-based practice? Oh, it's because the judiciary is making policy. And where are they making appointments? And why aren't they recusing themselves on questions that inform policymaking? Because most of those questions are questions of freedom or imprisonment for people of color. So I will just lay that out for you. But if there's any questions, I saw one about no-knock warrants. And just quickly to get on that, I would say that something else, Post Board could act on tomorrow. The Post Board should be acting on everything policing. The way you think about the Board of Teaching and the conduct of teaching, you should be thinking about the Post Board and the conduct of policing. Except the difference between the Post Board and the Board of Teaching is the Post Board's actually more powerful. The Post Board licenses chief law enforcement officers. It would be like if the Board of Teaching licensed principals, right? They license both management and labor, and yet do nothing. And it's part of the reason why they do nothing is because of the ignorance, not only our community, because it's not just about our community, it's the entire legal class around them. I've been waiting for a year just for any attorney who've been dodging me to tell me their authority. And they don't tell me their authority because they're scared of laying that out in writing. Because when it's laid out in writing, it's very clear that it has not only the authority to make rules about policing, but authorities to make rules to enforce the other rules that they make. It's sweeping authority. Anyway, I can get off my soapbox, but I will just continue to say that right now we should be working on, and hopefully with some of the new appointments coming to the Post Board, the Citizens Oversight Council, there should be a model policy for no-knock warrants being put into place. And there should be a licensure violation. If you violate that model policy for no-knock warrants, then you should have your license subject to revocation. If we had a serious licensing body, seriously wrestling with things that actually make their profession more dangerous, right? And actually make their profession more likely to violate the Constitution, then these things would have already occurred. But it was going to take outside pressure, outside knowledge for them to happen. So sorry again, I got my soapbox. Tried to race through as much as possible. Hopefully I didn't ruffle too many feathers.
Well, so Councilmember Dukes has a question, and it's a valid question. He said, can you make these recommendations available to us along with the rationale? And I would just say, you could send that to either Linda, any of the staffing, but I would say if you could send that to Linda, I think that would be, great, because then we could have, further dialogue of how we, kind of raise this and elevate some of these concerns and take a stance on some of the things that you had mentioned as well.
Okay, absolutely. And so what I'll try to do is send the best summary as possible. Technically, this is my week off, so y'all, making me work, but we're on spring break. So, but I'll send something over to Linda. I have some already written up, but they may have to put a little more meat on it, but I'll kick something over.
Any questions, any other questions from council members? I see Council Member Winston join us. Hello, Hollis. How are you?
Hi, everyone.
I think for me, Madam Chair, Jamal, thank you for coming through. The challenge of Greater Minnesota, the voices that are not at the table, as I mentioned to Commissioner Harrington, the policing morale and the way the community sees police is at an all-time low in rural Minnesota. There is no one in my community that's looking to become a police, nor what they're doing in other cases is they're not reporting crime because they're living with the crime that's safer than the police that are coming in. And we have to change that dynamic because the boogeyman is hiding in plain sight. And because we don't trust the police. So ways as a commission that we can, as a council, that we can work to help build that trust within our community, that they've given us this opportunity to be that voice at the table is important, and I'll pause there.
Yeah, and so there's a few things I think we're doing to help. So, I mean, part of what I struggle with, especially in this role, is kind of questions like this, is because there are things that can tangibly be done. And so, for example, when we put together Representative Frazier's House File 4200, it's a major public safety package. The third article is all about doing that. So what did we do? We empowered citizen oversight councils, right? We gave them the tool. We gave local city councils the ability to give their citizen oversight council the ability to investigate or even issue discipline. So if they so choose. We require transparency. Now, the governor everyone now has a body camera funding bill. We started it 2 years ago, listening to law enforcement like everyone claims to do. But we listened and we rolled out best practices with our body camera money. Everyone rolled out their body camera this year with no best practices. And I think the governor finally got pressured into putting out like a release by date. But does, for officer-involved shootings, but the question we always have is, should it even get there? And if it gets there, can't you just shut the camera off? So what good is a body camera unless you have a model policy requiring you to keep the camera on, right? So to me, that transparency can help with the community piece. But I tend to think, how much would you trust any profession that has super, constitutional authority and that's literally unaccountable to anyone but one person who's captured by a union? You wouldn't trust that profession. If it had no standards, no way to revoke anyone's license, if you literally needed a prosecutor to prosecute someone before the licensing board acted, how much faith would you have in that profession? And so it just and Linda probably got me one of my joking texts while I was listening to the commissioner is, when you talk with law enforcement about that, they won't name that problem of, hey, maybe this lack of trust is earned, right? And maybe it will never be like, why should I trust someone who's literally unaccountable? Like, I can't trust anyone if you can literally do anything to me and there's no one I can call. Like, that's a lot of trust to ask to invest in someone who's been continuously, antagonizing your community. Like, oh, now racism's really over and we're really sorry. I don't make it, to me, this is not again, we oftentimes have this discussion in terms of, a failure of racism, but it's really a failure of constitutional officers like the members I work for, like Commissioner Harrington, standing up for the Constitution and saying that, hey, we were sued for violating the First Amendment. We should be bringing statutes to ensure that we can never violate the First Amendment again. And if anyone does, they're automatically fired. Because I'm that much of a warrior in defense of the Constitution. And no law enforcement says anything like that. And by the way, a lot of us activists, we don't search for the language of constitutional duties and constitutional rights, partly because it's a lot more convenient. And this is when you look at the long history, and I'll get off my soapbox here, long history of police reform over the last 100 years. That is, I think, one of our biggest failings is that we don't speak in terms of constitutional rights, and therefore we're allowed to be treated like a luxury. It's a luxury, whether you're not racist or not. It's mean, it's not nice, right? It's not a failing of your core duty. And when we see these things happen, Mayor Locke, that's a failing of our core duty of our work, which is our work number one is to protect the Constitution. So
I do have a question. And actually, Theo, I saw you put it in the chat, but go ahead and unmute and you can go ahead and ask the question.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Jamel. Very, very enlightening, insightful presentation. I want to ask you, to speak more about the discussions around crime, like how you think, because that's what you opened with, that point there, and I found it insightful, but I want to really have you clarify a little bit how you think our community should be understanding and talking about the crime problem. Mm-hmm. I think I heard you say that the crime rate has stayed the same, but we have more crime because we have more people. Is that basically what you were saying?
So crime is high, right? And technically it is at a all-time high. But when you look at the rate, the crime per capita, right, is that we're essentially what we've gone down. We've came back from, all-time peak in the late 90s, I believe, mid 90s was the highest crime rate. And then we've had a slow descent downwards. And now we've begun to go back up, right? And it's been a precipitous rise. It's been a faster rise than maybe I think some say in certain parts of the United States than they've ever seen before, right? So there is cause for alarm. There needs to be an intervention done, right? But I oftentimes caution folks to say that per capita, like we're not in a whole new, Mad Max world here, right? Like we've just backslid a few years, right? That's what occurred. Now, there are things that we can do to respond to that, but we shouldn't be responding to that without some basic knowledge. One, this ain't only happening in Minnesota. It's a national crime wave, right? So there are things, everything we've done in Minnesota maybe slightly had an effect up or down, but it is certainly not the cause, right? So anyone pointing a finger to anyone in Minnesota, whether you're a reform person or whether you're a crime and punishment person, it's folly. It's not based on anything real. One. Two, that crime is it's not just concentrated in urban areas. And literally look at the crime rate, like look through, you'll see small towns and big towns. Big Stone, Minnesota, I think it's one of the top 20 places, right? It's throughout the state. You'll see it, Virginia, Minnesota, top 20 in crime, right? And Carl can tell you, hey, that ain't a big city, right? It is not people running from Virginia to Minneapolis all the time. No, it's because uniquely the community, right, has going through its own issues. So you need to know that. And then I guess the other important part is you need to know about our solutions. What capacity do we have? If we think law enforcement is a magic wand, we drop more cops, then crime will go down, which technically is partially true. Law enforcement, again, evidence. If you're within the proximity of law enforcement, crime is less likely to occur, right? But law enforcement only has a temporary effect on crime, right? And so can we flood our blocks with law enforcement? No, we can't. Because there is not enough candidates coming out of our law enforcement candidate school. So even if we try to expedite the process, the fastest we can get more cops is maybe a year. But by then, we'll be in a completely different crime environment, right? And so we cannot solve this problem with more cops, which is why the Senate bill's a ridiculous piece of paper, right? We can't just alone do that. But what we can do is build our capacity. We can build law enforcement capacity. How can we do that? Well, for example, Minneapolis had a really great program, the Canopy program, which sent out people to write up tickets for theft reports, right? Well, law enforcement doesn't need to be there. And by sending out, non-law enforcement officials to do what would be a regular law enforcement response, just writing a ticket for someone stole your bike, someone stole your TV, here's your ticket, get back to me. You create additional capacity for law enforcement. I think it was like a third of their time was spent writing these tickets. You can pick up a third of capacity for law enforcement by doing that. But if you don't incentivize those type of and fund those type of new, dynamic, innovative, evidence-based practices, law enforcement is going to keep pocketing money, doing their ineffective things and pointing the fingers at other people. And I think a big part of the way we look at crime is we need to care enough about crime to examine everyone's practices. That includes the community violence interrupters. That includes, that's partly why in House File 4200, you have the most amount of oversight for grants the state's ever had. Because we want to know what's effective. And that oversight doesn't just extend to community groups, it extends to municipalities and law enforcement organizations. Hey, are you doing what you say you're doing? And even if you're doing what you say you're doing, is it actually effective? These are questions that we don't ask law enforcement. We just cut the check and say, figure it out. And I just think when you look, and I'll leave it at this, but there are simple things like body cameras that when you spend the time and look at them, ACLU will tell you more times than not, they're used in favor of the prosecution, right? That they're not some big, defense thing that law enforcement wants them because it helps them do their job, right? The only catch is that they should be required to keep the footage and share the footage, whether it's favorable to them or not. And the only way you're going to ensure that occurs is by making them do that, right? And so there's a lot of these discussions where I think a lot of folks, there's this, I know everyone here probably enjoys this, which is either for cops or against cops, right? And for me, it's like they are a public safety tool like any other. and we should be thinking thoughtfully about how that tool's applied, and we should be having oversight and accountability for when that tool doesn't work properly. And I feel that when you can talk to Al Flowers and a lot of these folks who work in that violence prevention space, I have that same discussion with them, right? But it's just that for me, we should talk about crime realistically, and what we can actually do to address it. Now, I'll speak really quickly, and I'm sorry, I'll be super quick about this SRO problem, right? If you talk with law enforcement, they'll say, hey, we need to, the SROs work with cops, et cetera, et cetera. People who specialize in doing work with kids tell me that police shouldn't be doing work with kids, right? Like when law enforcement reaches kids, it's too late, right? People doing work with kids should be the resource for police. So when police interact with them, they can then say, hey, I know Jim over here, he does a community center. You need to go over here, talk with him. We need to do pre-trial diversion. You need to go over here, right? Those are all tools that we fund, that the Senate does not fund, right? For law enforcement. It helps increase law enforcement capacity. If you ask Chief Blair Anderson from St. Cloud, he'll tell you I need more of these tools. But I think a big problem is that there's a selective listening on the GOP side when it comes to the Senate. And a part of that also is that because we don't go to those spaces. Our community groups, they come to me. They come to the House or DFL side and say, hey, we're doing all this great work. Can we please get in the bill? And there's never a crying out of bloody murder of you would rather build $24 million of additional beds for incarceration than they give us $1 million. That's crazy, right? And we'll probably divert that many folks if you fund us properly. So I can go on forever, but.
Well, Jamil, thank you so much. I mean, great information that you gave us. I know that we'll be doing some follow-up because there's some more questions in the chat that we just can't get to.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not gonna talk forever.
But no, you're good. You're good. I mean, it's a hot topic, so we knew that this was going to be, lots of questions. How do we lean in? How do we dig in? Where do we take our stances? And, I'm sure that there will be some follow-up from Linda and her team on some work that we can probably do together. And we appreciate you coming when you're on spring break. So appreciate
I got
that.
time now. No.
Well, thank you, and you have a fabulous night. Again, same thing. If you're welcome to stay. We only have a half an hour left, or otherwise, I understand.
I'm gonna cut and run, but I wouldn't be doing justice to all the help that I get every day from Linda and Theo if I don't give them a big shout out. Because I'm serious. I mean, a lot of the work around police reform, following the post board, being that voice in the Senate. I asked them to step up in a big way and say, hey, we had these discussions around funding for community groups. I know you all are pushing for that. Here's an opportunity for you to get in, and they, showed up. Sandy Pappas read their letter. So I can't say enough. I'm really happy to have partners like Linda and Theo able to help me. So thank you all for inviting me as well. So.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All right, you have a nice one.
So council members, if there were questions in the chat, maybe Linda, you can get that over to Jamil and then he can, respond to that. But I knew I couldn't get to everybody. So let's move on. We do not have any public members on here. So I'm going to bypass public comment. Real quick, we just wanted to give for old business, Linda, if you want to just kind of give a quick position update of where we are with Shakira's position, the posting.
So there were 12 applicants and HR screened them, they screened the resumes. And so then we had 6 people that we looked at. And as it stands right now, we are reaching out to a couple of people to interview. Shakira is going to also be a part of the interview team. So hopefully, if one of the 2 candidates is amazing, at least one person does work for the state and has that background. But we're hoping that we can get her position filled very quickly.
Thank you. And then let's go ahead and move on into new business. So if you want to just kind of discuss the redistribution of workload and what that looks like for you all.
Okay, well, the CMAH team is now just Theo, myself, and Flockamy. Flockamy will be picking up the website and what else are you, and some of the more marketing communications pieces. And then everything else I'll just be handling, of course, with the help of the rest of the team. So that's kind of where we're at. So be kind and give us some grace. If things aren't quite perfect, that's not because we don't strive for excellence. It's just because there's the three of us just trying to manage the workload of 4 people. So
No,
thank you.
totally understood.
Dynamic trio.
I'm recording this so I can play this back in 6 months.
Dynamic trio. Repeat. And if this was a 45 back in the day for you young people that don't understand that, you just pick up the needle and play it again.
That's right. That's
But you got to have the penny or the quarter on top of that.
right.
Girl, you know that's a nickel that you put on that thing. A quarter's too heavy and a penny too light. Come on now, quit playing.
So let me stay on track. So let's move. Any questions before I move on? All right. So in-person meetings. So if you all remember, we had this conversation in January and we said, once we hit second quarter, let's revisit whether we want to move towards in-person meetings or whether we want to kind of continue on. The executive team met last Tuesday. Was it Tuesday? All my days are running together. Yes, last Tuesday. And we had decided that it would be good for us to revisit this again in July. And the reason why we're saying that is because May-ish is kind of when they're estimating for people to go back into the office. And even when the team goes back, it may not necessarily be 5 days a week. It could be 2 days, it could be 3 days. And so we said, well, let's take the second quarter and just kind of see where things are. And if you've been watching CDC, they're concerned that we're starting to creep back up, that we kind of have opened up a little bit, too quickly, too fast. And so we had decided that let's do second quarter, and then for July's meeting, let's make that decision whether we want to do in person or some type of hybrid. If we do a hybrid model, the challenge that I'm going to say is making sure that we have the technology, because typically that's what we end up running into, is not having the bandwidth for technology in order to do kind of a hybrid. I did give, Linda and her team an idea of a tool that we use here. It's called the OWL, the meeting OWL, which will capture like everybody that's in the room, but we would have to make sure that they have the capabilities for using something like that, so that some people that are online and then some people that are in the room, we would still be able to see. If you're online, you would feel like you're in the room because you'd be able to see everybody. So questions or comments, are people okay with that? I don't think we necessarily need an official vote, because I think it's just more of a consensus if you all are okay with us saying, let's go through second quarter, which would be the end of the fiscal year, basically is what we're looking at, June 30th. And then for July's meeting, let's make that decision whether we want to, move forward from there. I'm seeing thumbs up. I'm seeing heads nod.
Yes, I agree with that. If there are calendar events through the summer that you feel the council should be present for different community events, that may be an exception if that invite goes out and we are requested to be at some of those events.
Thank you for that, Carl. I absolutely wholeheartedly would agree that if there are some summer events, then yes, I think we should definitely make sure that our presence is a physical presence is there. So thank you for that.
No, I support that. I support that too.
Okay. Thank you, Wayne. Go ahead. Any more, Wayne, before I don't want to cut you off?
No.
Okay. I see Councilmember Dukes. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. In July, can we also consider a hybrid meeting schedule, just in case, folks are not able to join meetings, always having that option? I think is something that a lot of people are talking about.
Nope, I agree. And I also, the other thing that we want to call out, July, as we know, July and August are heavy vacation time, for some people as well. And so I want to, keep that in mind that we make sure that we're, you know, appeasing to all modalities if we can. So I do agree with that one.
Yeah, and just to add, just in case, like you talk about the technology, maybe we start looking if it's gonna cost us anything to at the office, you know, so it's looking at that too. What it's gonna cost to do that.
So Linda, I would say look into what the capabilities are with Minute for the meeting owl, because that is probably your best bet. All right, perfect. All right, it is the rest of the meeting is staff report. So we're going to start with Linda, Theo, then Flockamy. And that'll take us to the end of the meeting.
Okay, great. I will make this quick. Most of what I've been doing over the last month really is still meeting with legislators and community partners on racial impact nodes, missing and murdered women's task force duties, meeting with agency people, Commissioner Grove, Deputy Commissioner Barrage, Commissioner Bailey, Patrice Bailey, who you guys know, Ramsey County, and I'm sure that Theo will talk a little bit about some of that work. And mostly, really, the focus is on has been on the office manager's departure. So spent quite a bit of time with Shakira trying to train and just get a data dump because, as I mentioned in the executive council meeting, there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that people aren't aware of to make the wheels turn. So I've been doing that, and just getting the job description revised, get it posted, and working with HR through the process, getting Shakira offboarded. And then as of March 16th, just picking up her responsibilities outside of the website. And the other piece is the bulletin that Flockamy has picked up and has been doing a fabulous job with both of those pieces, just jumped right in and just been on point with. So I want to thank her for that. And then just getting the office ready. So as of April 22nd, some of us will be in the office. We plan to rotate, so we won't be in every day, but I would like to have at least one person in the office every day. And just working on those details, making sure it's COVID safe. Doing some SMART training, the agency that does the administration for our agency, as well as a lot of the small agencies. And then there is an event, and I'll let Flockamy maybe talk about that in her presentation, her report, and then had the ability to testify for the no-knock search warrants. So I believe it was Councilmember Crawford that asked about that. So we did come out and, you know, wrote a letter and then testified. And thank you, Theo, for your help on getting helping with the preparation of testimony and then helping to write letters as well. I also testified on behalf of getting additional diverse or more diverse artwork on the Capitol grounds. I was asked to do that. All of the ethnic councils were, and so we did do that. And then testified in behalf of affordable home ownership, affordable housing. So that was pretty much what I spent most of my time on. The only other thing I would just say is for an action item for me is I'm looking at the per diem form and seeing if I can just streamline that process. One form, check the box, write it in and send it in. And so you'll probably see something coming up probably this week from me on that. So that's about it.
Thank you. Any questions for Linda before we move to Theo? All right, go ahead, Theo.
All right, thank y'all. Yeah, so for the legislative work, the primary focus in terms of a singular bill was the Crown Act. That's been a key focus for us throughout the session. So we continue to work with our partners in the work group, meeting regularly on that. Flockamy has been a really good teammate on that work as well. I presented on the Crown Act at the Center for Economic Inclusion Policy Committee meeting in March Madam Chair is also chair of that committee. So we have joined ranks in that community, and that was a good opportunity there. We also submitted a letter to the, so in terms of an update on the Crown Act, the status right now is that we know for sure that it's part of the House Judiciary's omnibus bill. So that's a big thing. I mean, it was passed in the House in February, and it's currently also included in their omnibus bill, which was also passed last week through committee. And so we expect that bill will go through the House, and it will be included in the judiciary, likely be the Judiciary and Public Safety Omnibus Bill that is negotiated between the House and the Senate. And actually, our previous presenter, Jamel Lundy, will be a key partner in that effort. So that is what we're looking forward to, and we're hoping that this bill, this legislation gets passed this year. Other sort of highlights, we had different meetings with community members and stakeholders around economic and education issues. We've been working with the Duluth, been engaged with the Duluth Iron Range African Heritage Committee, and our council member Crawford has been a key partner in that. And we also had some meetings with an entity called the Legislature for Freedom on education policy issues, education equity issues, and culturally centered approaches to education. So those types of services. Had some meetings with MDE on research and data practices, and that's a development that I will hopefully we'll see how that develops in terms of just improving community access to data and knowledge tools around education equity. Linda mentioned our meeting with Ramsey County. We had an initial meeting there to discuss strategic priorities and ways of partnering. And so we'll look into likely, have further meetings and sort of building a partnership relations and with Ramsey County. And we've also discussed, expanding that to Hennepin and other counties in the metro and beyond in greater Minnesota. And also, I mean, another thing I put here was that, I worked with Flockamy on a presentation that we did to DHS, the Cultural and Ethnic Studies, Ethnic Communities Leadership Council. You see what's on my mind, ethnic studies. No, Ethnic Communities Leadership Council. That was a good opportunity there to discuss some of our proposals and ideas around community empowerment. Various types of proposals related to health and human services policies. And finally, as Linda was saying, the public testimony, I mean, we continue to track, I mean, in this juncture on the legislative side, the key update there, as Jamel was saying, the legislature is in a break, right? The spring break, Easter break for this week. And last week, that was a major deadline in terms of appropriation bills. So high priority funding bills had to go through and receive some clearance from the main committees last week by I think the deadline was last Friday. So we had various omnibus bills that were moved through the House and the Senate that met that deadline in terms of the requirement there. And so we've been tracking some of our own priorities that we laid out and have discussed with the council in January and February. The inclusion of some of those in those omnibus bills, and so that will be something that will be the main focus in the weeks ahead here in April and the end of session is the inclusion of some of those high priority items that are in our policy agenda. In March, we delivered or had written testimony on several bills, including the Affordable Home Ownership Incentive Account proposal that's led by Representative Thompson, a bill on equity and non-discrimination in access to organ transplant that's led by Chair Richardson, again, the House Judiciary Policy Omnibus Bill that includes not only the Crown Act, but it also includes a really important legislation on pay discrimination, prohibition of pay discrimination. That's part of our judiciary and public safety priorities. And also I think was mentioned by the commissioner, the Office for Missing and Murdered Black Women and Girls, a really important next step in those efforts around addressing disparities and inequalities with regards to violence against Black women. And then also, as Linda mentioned, the no-knock warrants, the move to really ban those, or at least place stricter, very, very strict restrictions on their use statewide. So those are some of the bills that we have provided public testimony for in March. And there'll be, for sure, as the things really hit up here, we'll be looking to engage more with the council members on the omnibus legislation.
So Councilmember Adams has a question. Said, what midterm efforts are we addressing?
That's a good question. I will have my teammates also join in on that one. So can you say, in terms of midterm efforts, can you speak more to that question? I need to understand that question more.
How about Yolanda? If you just want to, okay, go ahead. I was gonna say if you want to unmute.
I'm concerned about there's movement, as everyone knows, in regards to unseating during the midterm elections and how pivotal those are for those of us of color. And my concern is, and my question is driven by what efforts are we making to sustain, retain, and or go or make a shift if necessary politically around those issues and those that are supporting that are of our same ilk, that support our community's needs. And so I'm concerned that I keep, I'm following it pretty close in different news venues, etc., about, a aggressive effort of the Republicans in taking back the Senate and the House. What does that mean for us? So when I ask you the question, what are we doing about midterm elections? I guess that's what my question is driven by.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think that for our council, and I'll have Linda and the chair also speak to this. My own sense is that the role, based on whatever the statutes are in terms of limitations in our role as a state body, the role that we definitely can play is advocating for greater access or mechanisms that improve access for our community with regards to the electoral process. So really a focus on whether those be expanding voting rights, or at least empowerment of our community. There should be much broader participation, and we have the technological means to really improve participation in the electoral process. No matter where you are in Minnesota, you should be able, to make that easier. Efforts around that is, something that I think that we should turn an eye to.
Flakami, do you want to
talk
a little bit about plans?
That's a great segue into some of the things that we are planning. So in May, we are organizing or co-sponsoring an election event that's really going to be talking about the importance of elections. Someone from the Secretary of State is going to be there, and some of those questions that you mentioned, that question that you mentioned of having folks understand the importance of elections, but also just in relation to CMAH, how many Black people are running for office, understand the process, understand what impact their vote has on not only on the federal level, but really on the local level, right? The goal is really, we're targeting seniors, but then young people also. So we're gonna be streaming that as well. Having voter registration cards there, just so we can get folks to be registered the day of, but then also linking to where they can look at who's running in their local districts and precincts and things like that. And then towards the end of this, usually what happens is that we'll see that a lot of stakeholders and community leaders will start to post on their various social media platforms. Hey, here are the folks, here are the Black people who are running for office. And so making sure that we're having community leaders attending that will be very important. We're also we've connected with Common Cause. And so we're kind of in the conversation space right now of like, what would it look like to have an event, or at least to update folks on redistricting that's happening and how that affects their votes, and the folks that they can vote for. Because some people have been, depending on where you live, the new lines that have been drawn some people are not, they can't run anymore. So that's really important, especially when we're looking in, places where our community members live. So those are some of the things that we're doing. Definitely would like to continue to talk about that as we get closer to those days.
And I have been asked if we could host some debates. So somebody did ask me that. So we'll take that under consideration. And again, being nonpartisan, we would just have to make sure whatever we do is equitable and meets the statutes that we're operating in.
I hope that my question didn't seem non-bipartisan, but I want to know how can we assure that we have that information so that our constituents can be a part of that learning event. And real talk is that I just needed to say what I needed to say because it will impact our community, and that's a part of. I'm not gonna dance around what needs to be said. So forgive me.
That's definitely important, and elections do have consequences. And I think something that will be important, especially when we have our policy agenda, right? That the community is helping us co-create, making sure that we are looking at that. I would recommend, like for me as someone who works for CMAH, that's something that I like to look at in terms of like, what are my priorities as someone who's part of this community, and who are the people who are supporting that? And how do I make sure that the things that I care about are being uplifted and talked about? I think that's the real importance about voting. Beyond just registering to vote and voting is making sure that the public is controlling the narrative about the topics that we're talking about. And that is, I think, one of the things that we can continue to highlight is that we have the power to control these narratives, to make sure that folks, no matter what party that they are a part of, are addressing the issues that we have. So no apologies needed.
Right, you're fine.
Yeah.
I think that is what I was trying to address. I come from, I'm old school, and so I remember how in our community, you didn't used to be during, Dr. King and Jesse Jackson and all that. You had to talk to our community leaders, the pastors, the bishops, and so forth in our community, and you had to come to them to talk to get permission to address our community and how is this going to impact our community. And I guess where I'm coming from is that is one of the things that I really want as a council person, and a commitment to what we're doing and what we need to have done. That's all I'm asking. How do we do that? How do I do that and be committed to the council and my community? So thank you for the information, both you and Thea.
absolutely. And I know we have 5 minutes, and so I just want to, yeah, I just want to say a couple other things that we're working on. So that event is May 5th. I'll make sure to send that out to everyone. The governor's office we are collaborating with the governor's office on a series of listed topic specific listening sessions that they're going to be doing monthly. The first one is tomorrow, and it'll be monthly. So, and I will be there. I'll make sure to send that information out to everyone. And CMAH will also be conducting our own community-specific listening sessions around the state as well in the summer after the session is over. So those are opportunities, again, for us to kind of hear the voices of folks and really start to prepare, just to get their appetites wet before the election, before election hits. And then something that is specific to CMAH is the issue groups that we are planning to roll out. That is something that we would love to have council members take a look at that. And just, I would love some feedback on what folks feel like about those issue groups. And then just for the sake of time, I'm not going to read all of them, but then just give me some feedback on which ones you feel like you would like to participate in, or if there some reshuffling needs to go around for that. And then finally, we as the council will be having an African-American conversation. So we are still looking, I'm looking for feedback on folks who you think would be good facilitators. And if you want to help plan this, let me know. Yes, so that's it. I know that's really quick, but I want to be respectful of time.
Well, and I would say too, Flockamy, don't hesitate. We can do a follow-up email. Just because there's so much information that, we were given tonight. And I know some people are like, why do y'all meet for 2 hours? But then when they see the amount of information, right, that is given, but then also the call to action. And so what I would say to the three of you is split it out as far as your call to action. Give the topic, what's your call to action that you're asking, and then give a timeline. So council members, I'm asking you that once you get that email, please respond in a timely manner so that input is given and so that the three of them can kind of move forward with that, because there are some exciting pieces that they want to move on, but they also need our input. And at the end of the day, the community is going to ask us, hey, I heard you all are doing this, and we can't be a deer in headlights not knowing, if we don't respond. But I think it is important that we make sure whatever the call to action is, then we're clear on what our response is. So I think that will be helpful, because I know with the issues forum that you're talking about, we're also, talking about the debate. And I just see in the chat that Linda said, she will connect with, Alfreda and, Yolanda and others that may have an interest in what does that look like. Is if it's a candidate forum, then we have to, again, remember we're nonpartisan. So I would just throw that out there. Great job that you all are doing. We know you're down one person. Don't hesitate to, reach out to the council members too, if there needs to be some lifting somewhere. That is feasibly possible for us to do. The last thing that I'll say before we close out is I just wanted to open up if there are any announcements. So, and this is the time for people that either have events that are going on that they want the council to support, or if there's any other announcements that people want to make.
I have one, the Healing Justice Initiative by Dr. Joy Segoy that participated this summer in the George Floyd and the civil unrest healing circles, which I'm a facilitator of that, is promoting what are the next steps. And Resma Mackey is going to, Resma is going to be a facilitator of those conversations. There will be two. One will be in June of this year, and the exact date is to be TBA, and I will provide that later. I'll send it, Linda, if that's okay. I'll email that date. And then there's another in May, which is more of an urgent, if you will, sort of date, because they want to engage youth and young adults prior to the kickoff of summer. And it triggered me in regards to what Commissioner Harrington said about how things might look. So I think that it's a very honorable, that has nothing to do with me. It has to do with how do we continue to heal in our communities? How do we protect our communities and our children? And how do we support that? So
Thank you. Any other announcements?
I have more of a question of clarification than an announcement. Fluckney did mention hosting that a conversation with Africans and African American community. African Americans. Are you specifically talking about like the two communities?
The board, just for the council members for now. Yeah, that I'm specifically speaking about just for the council, our board.
So
yes, for the Africans and African Americans on our council.
Yeah. And,
Okay.
and Councilmember Daniels, that came from the strategic plan. That was something that came out of the strategic plan, and we committed to having that done. And then after that, we'll look at doing additional panels with the community. That's the plan.
And then I just linked in the comments the RSVP for tomorrow, but
Perfect.
Feel free to connect with me if you can. If that link doesn't work, I'll try to get the direct link, just send it to folks.
Okay.
will there be a follow-up email to that, Flocka? Because
Yes.
it kind of went fast and I'm old and I didn't track well.
Yes, yeah. I'll send it. I'll send it too.
Perfect. Any other announcements? All right, with that, if I can have a motion to adjourn, awesome meeting you all. Thank you.
So moved, Crawford.
Is there a second?
Nadi, second.
All right, we are officially adjourned at 8:03. Thank you all. Have a fabulous evening.
All right.
Thank you.
Stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys are awesome. Hey, now we survived another meeting. Oh, Flackamy, I felt so bad. What happened with the Facebook thing?
I don't know let me make sure. Okay, you're still recording, just to let you know.
Oh.
SEMA power. SEMA power.
SEMA power.
Yeah, I don't know. I was